Okay, so good morning, everyone. Also those on the web stream. So now we will have more, a bit more practical sessions on tools. So we will start with a session on Kazar, and then you will have a session on the Kazar toolbox. We thought that it's important before introducing Kazar to put a bit the frame on the chemical safety assessment. So I will do a short presentation, more introducing chemical safety assessment, and then the link to Kazar. I have two colleagues here also. So Connie will do a demo of Kazar after that, and then you will have the opportunity to ask questions. Stefano is also here. The idea is that you remember our face, so if you have questions, then you can catch up at whatever break and then ask the questions. Tomorrow there will be a stand on Chesar in the room over there, so if you have more practical questions, then just come and talk to us. Because indeed, I mean, it's called training on Kazar, but it's very difficult to do a training on Kazar in 1 hour, or a bit more than 1 hour we have. So it will be more presentation, high-level presentation of Kazar. So I'm Hélène Magot, working on the project since the very beginning. So as I said, we'll talk a bit on the chemical safety assessment and put Kazar a bit into context. You probably know a lot about it, but not bad to put everybody on the same level. So the chemical safety assessment aims to characterize the properties of the substance with regard to its hazard. So classification, reflect level, for example, or properties, for example, fate properties like vapor pressure, water solubility, degradability, etc. It is there to determine the conditions under which the substance can be used safely during its entire life cycle. So not only the manufacture, but all the further life cycle stages of the substance. And to communicate, to set the basis to communicate these conditions with the safety data sheet to all the commercial users of the substance, whether the substance is used as such or in mixture. The chemical safety assessment is documented in the chemical safety report for the own documentation of the registrant, and is provided as part of the registration dossier. So the information is then forwarded to especially the authorities, and part of the information is also can be disseminated. Very briefly, I think we all know that the elements of the technical dossier, so of the registration dossier, so it's composed of a technical dossier, which is done in Euclid. You have, I think, a training on Euclid in the afternoon. And then the chemical safety assessment, when it has to be done, meaning for substances which are manufactured or imported at more than 10 tons per year, is reported in the chemical safety report, which is attached to the technical dossier. And the tools which we have is that all the information for the technical dossier is reported in Euclid, but the exposure assessment, when required, so in particular when the substance meets the criteria to be classified hazardous, or is VPBB or PBT, then this can be done in Kazar, and then there is a tool which is called the report generator, which is included in Euclid, which enables to generate. Well, actually, it's included in Kazar now for the full CSR. So if you can generate the the CSR with section 1 to 8 from Euclid, and the CSR with everything from section 1 to 10 in Kazar. Just a few ideas to introduce what are the typical assessment questions. So these are very generic questions, but which you may be confronted to if you have to carry out an assessment. For example, which type of exposure controls are needed at workplace to handle the substance safely? And this may concern both activities at the industrial workplace, but also activities at non-industrial workplaces. From the environmental perspective, for example, how much of a substance can be used per day at an industrial site in a given process without on-site pretreatment of wastewater? Or when will you need, the alternative question is when will there will be a need for wastewater treatment, for example. A registrant may ask himself whether a substance is generally suitable to be widely used by untrained workers in small business or consumers. So if the substance is particularly hazardous, as a registrant, you may want to warn that this substance should not be used, for example, in consumer products. And otherwise, how to ensure the inherent safety of consumer products, for example, containing the substance, or what could be the maximum concentration of the substance, what is the amount that can be used each time, what kind of package design may be useful, etc., to protect the consumer. So these are really the kind of questions you want to answer when carrying out your chemical safety assessment. So how to do a chemical safety assessment? Very basic workflow. So as a first, you know the substance properties, so both the hazard properties and the distribution and fate properties. And then you have to know the use and the conditions of use of the substance. And then matching those, you can get exposure estimates, so exposure assessment, exposure estimate per use. And then you compare the exposure estimates to the hazard level. So is the exposure potentially triggering some risk? So is above the no effect level or not? And then, so that's the way you answer the question whether the risk is considered control or not. If yes, everything is perfect, then you just report the outcome of this assessment in the chemical safety report, which, as I said already, is for the authorities and for your own documentation, and communicate the conditions for safe use in the exposure scenarios, which are annexed to the SDS. If no, two solutions. Either you have to iterate your assessment, so know better information either on the hazard of the substance or on the use and the conditions of use, or you may decide to advise against some of those uses in the SDS, and also provide this information as part of the registration dossier. So this is the basic workflow. And of course, who has which information? The manufacturer or the importer is the one who knows or is supposed to know the properties of the substance, while the downstream user, so those using the substance down the chain, know how the substance is used. And in order to be able to carry out the chemical safety assessment, then you need to put these two types of knowledge together. And that's why in the end and the reach, the communication in the supply chain is a key fact. You will hear about that again tomorrow, because this is one of the main challenges to be addressed in the reach. And I mentioned that the assessment has to cover the full life cycle of the substance. This is just to illustrate a bit the idea and to get the understanding that this is not so simple. You really have to assess the manufacturer of the substance, potentially as such, or if the manufacturer already put that in a formulation, then there may be different formulation stage which need to be assessed. Then the substance may go to different end uses, either end use at industrial sites by workers at industrial sites, or by workers but more in widespread manner, so by professional workers, or can be used by the consumer. So all this needs to be assessed, and then the substance may be, or the mixture may be incorporated into articles, and there is the need to assess the service life of the article. So the full life cycle is to be assessed. The information flow, so I already mentioned that there is a need for communication. In the end, the registrant, so the one who is here on the top, has to prepare his registration dossier. But for that, he needs information on the use of the substance. And this probably comes, that's the arrow on the left, from downstream user. What are the existing uses for the substance, and under which conditions do they take place? This is a critical information that the registrant needs in order to be able to do a meaningful assessment. And from this assessment, he derives the conditions for safe use in the exposure scenario, which is then communicated to each downstream user recipient, to each individual downstream user. Under which, it is so that, in fact, the communication from downstream to the registrant is not mandatory, so may be provided. But in fact, the exposure scenario, which is provided by a registrant to a downstream user, is to be followed. And the only alternative to this is then to do your own assessment, to do an own assessment. So we think that this is the fact that the recipient of the exposure scenario has to comply with this is normally, it's important that the exposure scenario fits the needs of the recipient. And that's why there is a lot of incentive so that this downstream user provide the appropriate information to the registrant. Otherwise, the exposure scenario which are generated by the registrant are probably not appropriate, and then the recipient doesn't know what to do with them. In this respect, and I will talk about it later, it's important that this communication up the chain is organized, probably centralized by sectors, because otherwise you cannot organize a one-to-one communication. And then that this communication is organized at the sectors level to cover the majority of the users. So this flow of information is really key. Some experience so far from registrations which have been submitted in the past. The derivation of the no effect level for the substance is intransparent sometimes or wrong, and this may lead to then inappropriate risk management measures. This is more on the hazard side. I don't know if in the afternoon in the Euclid training you have something that we have, some information. We have now developed a plugin to Euclid to help deriving DNLs and PNECs. Observation that we have made is that registrants have sometimes included all potential uses into their registration without any differentiation, just to be, from their perspective, initially on the safe side. And also doing this lacking use-specific volume. So in the end, it's not possible to understand what are the real uses and to which extent they remain and to which extent they take place. From this, the advice on safe use, which is then communicated down with the exposure scenario, is often very generic and sometimes unrealistic to be helpful to users of chemicals. The registrants sometimes have even copied and pasted the exposure scenario from their CSR in the SDS, and this leads to usually very long SDS and not so easy to read. And there has been a lot of manual transfer of data from one document to the other, and we can see that not only it's inefficient for the registrant, but sometimes you really have inconsistency mistakes. Also a point that was maybe mentioned already before, registrants have not necessarily planned for CSR updates. This is something which may happen and which will probably happen. So you need to think about having contractual arrangement. I think that was mentioned by Eva. And also, if your chemical safety assessment is not in a database format, is organized in many different documents, then it's very difficult to maintain. Potential consequences of all these observations. Customers complain about wrong or unhelpful exposure scenario in the SDS. The authorities pick the substance for further regulatory action for a wrong reason. If they have the impression that the substance is going to all kind of product and have no idea to which extent, then a substance may be selected for further regulatory action. And this causes trouble for everyone, if it's a wrong reason. If the registration dossier may be incompliant if there is inconsistencies between Euclid, the CSR, the SDS, so all this transfer of data, use of data, if it's not consistent, then it doesn't work. As mentioned earlier, the maintenance and the update of the registration dossier is quite burdensome and potentially costly. So these are all things which need to be thought through, and hopefully we have a number of solutions to help reducing those business risks. So very quickly, a bit on the tools which help the communication in the supply chain. You will hear about that also tomorrow. So same graph as before, but a few on the tools. So to communicate upstream the information on the condition of the use and the conditions of use, the use maps have been developed. The use maps are usually developed by downstream user association. They contain the description of the use and the condition of use in a standardized format, and they can be passed by to registrant. Those use maps can be even found in a consolidated place on ECHA website. Registrant have those tools. I mentioned already Euclid Kazar. I mean, we will go more detail into Kazar now. And then from Kazar, I mean, from this chemical safety assessment and the exposure scenario are generated. And for that, other tools have been developed, harmonized format, and then a catalog of standard phrase and a format for IT transfer of the exposure scenario, which is called ESCOM XML. A bit more on the use map, because it's a relatively important concept, which everybody tries to further develop at the moment, and there has been an engagement from CEFIC, DUC, which is Downstream User Organization, and ECHA to support the further development of use maps. So the idea is that the downstream user sector organization map out all the common uses among their membership and document this information in a harmonized format. They describe the existing conditions of use in a way that this can be really used directly by the registrant in its exposure assessment for the workers, for the consumer, and for the environment. And also, in these use maps, those conditions of use should be phrased in a way that the downstream user will receive the exposure scenario then back from the assessment, can recognize, understand the EAS, and can compare it with its own condition of use. So that's the development of the use map done by the downstream user sector organizations. And then for the registrant, they only have to select the use maps, select the uses which are relevant for their substance in these use maps, and then upload this information package in their assessment. So as said, you can find the currently published use maps, and we hope to have more in the future, at this address on ECHA website. So now introducing Kazar, which is the tool that ECHA has developed to support registrants to consistently carry out their chemical safety assessment, generate automatically in a way their chemical safety report, which will be then part of their registration, and generate also the exposure scenario for communication in a consistent way, which will describe the conditions for safe use, and which will be annexed to the extended SDS. The application is a web application, but is released as both a desktop, so you install it on your computer, or a server version, meaning for big companies, they can have it in a distributed version. It's free of charge. We think it's very easy to install, and you will get more information now. So how does it work? You see that Chesar is here in the center. It's the registrant. In fact, it enables to import directly the information on the substance properties from the registrant Euclid instance. So all what is reported the key information which is useful for the chemical safety assessment and which is reported in the Euclid technical dossier is imported directly into Kazar. And then there is also a possibility to import use maps as far as if they are generated, if they are provided by the sectors in a Kazar format, they can be imported directly, with one click, and all the information gets there into Kazar. Kazar is a machinery to carry out the chemical safety assessment. It has some embedded exposure estimation tools. It is also possible to report manually information from exposure estimation obtained with other tools not embedded into Kazar or from measured data. From Kazar, then the CSR is generated, and there is also a possibility to report automatically in Euclid some information on the use description and exposure assessment, which is then part of the technical dossier. It's also possible from the same set of information to consistently generate the exposure scenario for communication. And there is both the possibility to have a kind of print version, but also an IT XML version that can go directly to the downstream user or the registrant on IT system. This is something that you all know. Once the registrant submits his registration to ECHA, then the ECHA and the member states, the authorities have access to this data and can use it for further priority setting, for example, or compliance check. And part of this information is then disseminated to the public. So this is the overall workflow. Kazar being able to take information and a lot of IT transfer of information and to generate both of information for the authorities and for the customers in a consistent manner. How does it work? So we talk always about the Kazar boxes. In fact, there is a workflow in Kazar. So the steps can be done, the assessment can be done step by step, but there is also possibility to go back. So we have 7 boxes. The first one is about substances, so where you manage your substances, where you can see the information coming from Euclid, etc. Understand a bit everything about your substance. The box 2 is about reporting the uses. So I mentioned there is the possibility to import use maps, already predefined description of the use and conditions of use. There is also, of course, the possibility to manually describe the uses, so it's up depending on the situation. And there, all the uses of the substance along the full life cycle can be done. Then the box 3 is about exposure assessment, so getting exposure estimates, carrying out quantitative exposure assessment, but also qualitative exposure assessment, depending on the hazard properties of the substance. The box 4 is to generate the CSR and also to export the information back to Euclid. And the box 5 enables the generation of the SDS, the exposure scenario for the SDS, so the exposure scenario for communication, both printed version and IT version. So these are the key steps of the chemical safety assessment. It helps to carry out the assessment, and it's always possible to go back and forth if you want to prefer to assess one use from A to Z, or whether you want to do it first, the full description of your full use and then the full assessment. I mean, it's very flexible in its use. We have 2 additional boxes which are of a bit different nature. One is a library of elements which can be reused across assessment, and the last one is a bit of user rights administration. So I will not go further than this in the description of Kazar, because Connie will do the full demo. Just a bit of explanation, high level, what are these, we think, the opportunities which are provided by Kazar. First of all, this consistency within the CSA, because the substance properties and the users reported in Euclid are totally consistent with the chemical safety report, because the information is transferred in a way automatically. So no possible, well, it's easy and no possible for mistakes. The information for the authorities, so in the CSR, and for the supply chain, so the exposure for communication, are also generated in a consistent way. They have the same basis, and it's only provided into different type of forms, adapted to the needs. It's very standardized, and this helps all the actors. So the workflow is systematic. So once you have learned to do it for once, then you understand and you can go better and quicker for the further assessment. But also the formats, what is imported, exported, printed, etc., are harmonized, which makes it easier, quicker to read, to find the information back, etc. And it has quite a number of functionalities which make the tool, I would say, efficient. So, for example, the fact that you have integrated exposure tool, that you can reuse the information across substances, this automated generation of documents facilitates the updates, because everything is in a database format. So if you have some information to change, you just go at the right place and change it. And also a number of functionalities trying to make the assessment not too burdensome, as quick as possible, but also we have been a bit careful sometimes that we still would like people to think when they do their assessment. It should not be too automated. More information on Kazar after Connie's demo. You can find information on the Kazar website in the Kazar user manual. Also, I think in the current Kazar version, what is key is to use the help text. So on each page, you always have this question mark, and you have a relatively short help text, which helps really using the tool. I mean, I really encourage that you use this because many of our questions that we receive via our help desk are answered in the help text, which is usually short. We had a number of webinars which have been recorded with the full demo, etc. We have been organizing some training. We have still planned to organize the next one in June. We have at the moment a list of potential interested participants because we made a call for interest in training earlier. We will see whether, depending a bit of the interest also here, whether we make a new call for interest on Kazar trainings. But I mean, we need to be also honest that we have a number of requests and we may not be able to accommodate all the training requests, but we do really our best. So I would really encourage you to go on the Kazar website, which is at this address. There is on the right a button which says subscribe. If you want to be informed, and it's not very often, don't worry, but from time to time we put some information like a call for interest on training, like when there is a new version, I mean a few information. So you will get an email for this news if you subscribe here. So if you're interested, please do. And I will not show it, but I would encourage you to have a short look at this video, which you can find a link here, which in 1.5 minutes reminds you a bit the key features of Kazar. And now I think I will pass the floor to Connie for a demo, more concrete.
So after this more general introduction, what I would like to do is give you a short demo of Kazar. We don't have a lot of time, so it's going to be quite high level, but I hope it gives you a bit of an idea of what we can do in Kazar and how it can help you in preparing your registration dossier. I hope it's visible to everyone on this screen or one of the screens that you have in front of you. A little introduction also. What I'm showing you today is actually a beta of Kazar 3.2, which will be released at the end of May. It has some nice new functionality in it, which we would like take the opportunity to show you. But be aware, if you download 3.1.1, which is the currently available Kazar, it may look a little bit different in some parts. I will try to tell you when I'm going through them what the differences are. Now let's start. You see I have Kazar running. I also have Euclid running to show you a little bit the interaction. Let's have first a look at the start screen. And you see here immediately at the top these boxes, which Elaine already introduced shortly to you. So we have box 1 for substances. The second one is for uses. The third one is for conducting your assessment. 4 is for making your CSR and exchanging with Euclid. And 5 is for the ESDS. We also have the 2 supporting boxes here, which I will not show you during this demo, but it's good to know that they are there. Also, maybe let's start immediately with showing you this little question mark, which Len told you about. And you see it's a very short description of where I am at the moment in the application. So I'm in box 1. With some helpful hints to help you in working with the application. Okay, now with this start screen, if we want to start working with Kazar, of course, we have to have a substance to assess first. What I will do is import that from Euclid via the web service. So I need to have Euclid running for them to be able to interact. I simply select this button and then I can enter some things to search for. I can also leave all these search fields empty and then I just get a complete list of everything that's in my Euclid database. So I search and I see that the results pop up here. I can select here, click to import, and automatically it's imported into Kazar. I get a nice message saying that it's successful. And you see here that my substance has automatically already been selected. So I don't even need to go and do that. Okay. Then a little introduction on the substance I'm using here. It's a substance which we have used to develop the so-called CSR illustrative example. It was already published quite a while ago, end of 2012, available on the ECHO website. It was really meant to give registrants an idea of what a chemical safety report may look like. And it also has an example of an ESDS, or the exposure scenarios to the SDS. It was already partially updated last year to have a Euclid 6 and a Kazar 3 file available. Those are on the Kazar website. And we're currently working on an update to implement some more lessons learned, to take into account the latest standards in good safety practice. And we hope to release that together with Kazar 3.2. So you will see some parts of that coming back, and if you want to have a better look, you can have a look at the files which are on our Kazar website. So now let's have a look at this substance that I've imported. You see that I have some boxes which have now lighted up on the left, in which I can see what substance I'm dealing with. So you see here the identity of the substance. You see here some information about phys-chem properties and fate. So these influence what happens to the substance when it is released. The general properties, but we also have here biodegradation, bioaccumulation, abiotic degradation, and absorption coefficients. Now, this is a screen which doesn't look the same yet in 3.11. Because we have introduced this little pencil here, which means that the values are editable not only in Euclid, but also directly in Kazar. May be nice if you want to get a feel for what happens if you change a property. But of course, remember that in the end, your dossier needs to be consistent, and anything that you decide upon will need to be in Euclid as well. It's just to enable a bit of extra flexibility. So this will be introduced with 3.2. At the moment, these properties are not yet editable. You also see here what the properties are used as an input parameter for. So for instance, the partition coefficient is needed if you want to run an assessment with the uses in most cases. Okay, then I will skip a few and go down to this one, which is the hazard conclusion and scope of assessment. You see I have one for environment, workers, consumers, and man via environment. And this just gives you an overview of, first of all, the hazard conclusions for your substance, and then also some information on the risk characterization type. The information in hazard conclusion comes directly from Euclid. So if you have entered the PNEC there, it will be shown here, including also the explanation if you click on this. What Kazar then does for you to help you out a little bit is conclude, based on what you have entered, what type of risk characterization you need to perform. If you have a PNEC, or for workers and consumers a DNL, then you will have a quantitative risk characterization. You may have decided that there is no hazard identified for your substance. In that case, the risk characterization type will be not needed. And especially for workers and consumers, you may also have some effects for which you cannot derive a DNL. For instance, skin irritation, eye irritation. There you have a qualitative hazard conclusion and also a qualitative assessment. Okay. Then I will proceed to the next box, because now we have our substance. So the next step we need to take is to define the uses of the substance. And that's really what we do here. There are several ways in which you can build your life cycle tree. Helene already told you a little bit about that. First of all, what I can do is simply create my uses one by one. If I right-click, I can say add. For instance, here I would like to add a manufacturing use. So I enter that. Of course, I should provide a description of that, and very important also a tonnage. So let's say that 200 tons of the substance is manufactured per year. And you see, after I have saved, this is successfully created. So this is the use as a whole. I also need to have some contributing activities. So for both the environment and workers, we need to define what is done with the substance and what happens. So for environment, I will create a contributing activity. Again, we should add an explanation here and select the relevant ERC. As I'm in the manufacturing stage, the only relevant one is ERC1. I will save, and you see my contributing activity has been created. And I will add just one for workers as well. For instance, manufacture in closed system. I select the relevant proc. Well, it's in the closed system, so I will take proc 1. And then we have here also the contributing activity, which I just created. Normally, I would have to make more than just one, because usually there are more activities taking place at one site. But for now, I will leave it at this and show you also some other possibilities. Now, you can imagine the formulation step may be the same across different substances. So I may have worked on another substance and created what we call a CSA block, which I can import directly into Kazar. I will do that now. Import CSA block. I need to go on my computer to the place where it is stored. I will select the CSA block. And it is automatically added, as you can see here. So I don't just have one contributing activity, for instance, but I have imported in one go the whole use. And I can do that. I can reuse this CSA block for whichever substance I would like to. Important, of course, is to check that my tonnage is still correct, because I have now imported it in a new substance. Let's say that the complete tonnage is formulated. And also to have a look at the technical function of the substance of this specific substance. So remember to complete the whole thing when you are reusing these objects. Okay. So that's another way to get some uses into your Kazar. Another way is the use maps, which Hélène already told you a little bit about. The one I'm using now is completely fake. It's not one that has been developed by a sector, but just to give you an idea. I know that, for instance, this substance is used in coatings. So I will import a coating use map. There we go. And you see that here my market sector has been added. Now, actually, I wanted to put it below formulation. And I can really easily reorder my uses by right-clicking and saying move down. And you see that it's automatically moved. Now, if I want to open this up and have a look, I can do that by pressing the plus button. But we also have some nice buttons here, expand all, which automatically opens up my whole lifecycle tree. Again, here, very important, and especially as a use map, will never be substance specific, to adjust your tonnages and the technical function of your substance in the mixtures being used. Okay, now I have quite a list of uses here. Of course, remember to check that all of them are useful for your substance. If you import a use map, some uses may actually be included which are not relevant for your use. But if we have gone through all of that, we have the substance, we have the uses, then the next step is to go into the assessment, which we do in box 3. There we go. Let me just select a use here. So when I go into box 3, the first thing I may actually want to do is to add some default exposure data sets. Three tools are built into Kazar. We have for the workers is stock TRA workers, and we have also for the consumers TRA consumers, and we have EUSys for the environment. And I can go through all these scenarios one by one and add those exposure data sets, but there is also a button here in which I can add them all in one go, and I will do that now. So you see I can choose here which ones I want to add. I will start with the environment, and then the workers, and the consumers. So at least now I have as a basis the results of the built-in tools. Depending on your substance properties, you may actually not want to do this and do them one by one, but it's nice to have the functionality if you would like to. Okay, now let's have a look at an environmental contributing scenario first of all. This is the one that I just created. And I will just quickly take you through this. You see, first of all, what I start doing is to define my conditions of use. I can choose to do that manually, or I can choose to base it on a SPERC, which it can be developed by a sector association as part of the use map. I can, if I choose here now, what I will do is choose the manual selection, and then I have to start defining my conditions of use. So I can change the tonnages, for instance, I can change the STP, but I can also add new conditions of use. I will do that for one now. And when I have tried to do that, I get a complete list of all the conditions of use which are in my library. And that is the thing that you manage in this library box. I select the one that I want to add, and I say add condition of use. And you see it has been added here as one of the conditions of use, and I can change the value, because actually for this specific contributing scenario, this one should be yes. So all the wastewater is collected, and therefore there is actually no release to wastewater in this scenario. So when I have finished defining my conditions of use, the next part is about the releases. Here I have again some possibilities. I can base my releases on the default ERC values, which are in the guidance documents. But I can also choose estimated release factor, which means I can define what the release factor as a percentage is on that site. And I should remember always to provide a bit of an explanation on where I got that. And I can also choose to include a measured release rate, which means you can enter the number of kilograms per day that are released. So that's really based on the measurements you have. So different methods in which to determine the release. And in case of the ERC, you don't need to do anything because it's been added by default. Okay, then the next part is about exposure estimates. As we added here the EUSys dataset, it's nicely there. There is also a possibility to report results from an external tool or measure data here. So if you have used an external tool for the environment, it doesn't happen a lot, but sometimes you may have used another tool or measure data, you can add that here. And that's about the overview. You see here at the bottom, there's also a tab for a daily intake via food, which is by default hidden, but if you want to have a look at the values, you can. Now, this was for manual conditions of use. Let me just show you what it would look like if I had chosen a SPERC. So this one has a SPERC assigned. It was part of the use map that I imported. You see, I know which SPERC there is. Important is, of course, to change the tonnage to the thing that is relevant here. And actually, for this site, I know that there is only 50 kilograms per day used at a single site. So I will adjust the tonnage to that. There we go. Now, for the rest, all these conditions of use have been included as part of the SPERC, and I cannot change anything. So you see, I can see the value, but I cannot change it. It's really read only. So except for a few things like the tonnage, you cannot make any adjustments because these conditions of use are part of the SPERC and are part of the releases defined by that SPERC. If I then go down, you see that my releases are again automatically filled with the percentages in the SPERC. The rest looks the same as I was in the previous one, but just to give you an idea what it would look like for a SPERC. Then quick intro on what it looks like in the workers. It's the same setup, basically, of course, different conditions of use. You also have here the possibility to choose manual or based on a SWED, which is the equivalent for workers. And you see here a lot of conditions of use, which you can change. For instance, for this one, I may know actually that there is local exhaust ventilation available, so I can change the value here. There is also a nice functionality in Kazar if you want to change the same thing in a number of contributing scenarios, because especially for workers, of course, you have a lot. For instance, I may know that everything going down from industrial use, actually the percentage in the mixture is not 100% like mentioned here, but only 1%. And if I want to change that for all those scenarios, I can use the bulk actions. I will bulk edit this one. And I go into the bulk edit mode. And you see here that I can make a selection which contributing scenarios I would like to make the change for. I have deselected everything above industrial use and leave everything below that selected. I will change the percentage to 1. I click Save. And then if I leave the bulk edit mode, I can go to whichever contributing scenario I want, and you see that it has been updated automatically. So that's a way to save a lot of time in this case. You see here, we don't have a releases part for workers and consumers, but we go straight to the exposure estimates. And again, we have the possibility to report not only the standard TRA workers, but also an external tool and measure data. For the external tool, you can either manually report the results of that tool. There is also the possibility to import an external tool dataset, but the export file will need to be available from the external tool. We are working with a few tool developers on that, so it should become more available in the future. And that saves, of course, a lot of manual entry of results. And again, the possibility also to report measured data. Now, for the workers, we also saw that there may be some qualitative assessment needed, and this is really based on the quantitative. And for that, we go to the risk characterization tab. And you see here that I have quite a number of endpoints for which I need to conduct a qualitative assessment. So inhalation local, dermal local, and eye local effects. I can go by these one by one and select them. Of course, I need to enter a justification why the risk is considered to be controlled. For instance, the LEV or the respiratory protection is sufficient. I click Save, and then you see that it becomes green. This is also something you can do with the bulk action, but I will not show you that now. There is another handy feature in Kazar to help you, and that's specifically for the dermal local and eye local effects. So for skin and eye irritations, for instance. You can imagine that under a certain concentration limit, this effect is no longer applicable. So you have in CLP, you have classification limits, and if the substance is in a mixture below 10%, then the mixture itself is not classified for irritation anymore. I actually have the possibility in box 1, under this hazard conclusion, to enter these concentration limits. So this one is for skin irritation, and this one is for eye irritation. I will enter the limits there. And now if I go back to the contributing scenario is just in, to the risk characterization tab, you see that automatically my qualitative assessment has been filled here and the risks are controlled. So that's another way to save a bit of time in conducting your assessments. Okay, that's a very short overview of how to conduct your assessment. You see that I have a lot of work to do here because all these little red exclamation marks are still not safe yet. So normally I would not be done at this stage, but for now I will just show you the next step, because once I have conducted my assessment, of course I want to report it, and I do that in box 4. This is another one that is a bit different to what you will see in 3.1.1. Because we have now implemented a full CSR preview in this box. So if you open any scenario, you will see exactly the content as it will be printed in your CSR. It also has the possibility to edit all the explanations, and that's signaled by the orange, saying that there is nothing there and you may want to provide something. It's not obligatory. For instance, if I go here, you can imagine that maybe I want to have some specific comments or some general comments for the environmental assessment. So I will enter that here. And then the color goes away. I can still edit it, so I can still go back and change what I did. But just to give you an idea. And this can be done scenario by scenario. You can review what you have done, what you have entered in the boxes before. You see where the text you entered actually goes in the CSR itself. And you can change it if you want to. So for now, in 3.1.1, this is not there. It's just the 9.0, which you can edit, and the rest will be added once 3.2 is released. What you also do in this box is export your uses to Euclid, which means that 3.5 of your Euclid substance will be automatically filled. It takes a few seconds, so I'm not going to show it now for the time, but it's a very easy functionality. And of course, once you have done that, so once you have synchronized your uses with Euclid, you can generate a full CSR. So sections 1 to 10, where 1 to 8 come from Euclid and 9 and 10 are added by Kazar. Yeah, I can quickly show you again. This is a reminder that you should be careful that everything is synchronized. And this takes a few seconds, but it's a big document being generated. There we are. And there it is. So you see it's automatically been generated. The idea is, especially also with this editable preview in box 4, that you don't need to make any manual adjustments anymore after you have generated this. So we want to make as much as possible that you can do everything in Kazar, which facilitates also updating, because if you have to make manual adjustments afterwards, then of course if you generate a new one, you will have to do them again. So we try as much as possible to facilitate the updates and have everything editable in Kazar. Okay. Last step in the process, once we have the CSR, is of course to communicate to the downstream users, which we do via the exposure scenario for communication. There are a number of things which you can change. Actually, if you have done everything well, then you don't need to make a lot of changes, but it is customizable to what you would like. There are some things you can change at exposure scenario level. So, for instance, the short title, and this incorporates the guidance that has been developed about it. You can see actually the link to the publication about that here in the help text. And also here you can enter some guidance you would like to include, some scaling tools, instructions, things like that. And then there are a number of things which you can adjust at exposure or contributing scenario level, and that's typically the conditions of use that you would like to include or exclude. You can change the standard phrase that you would like to attach, things like that. Once you are done with that, you can generate your SDSES. There are again some things you can choose. You can choose which ones you want to include. For now, I will exclude the manufacturing stage. You can choose some things in the formatting, so include or exclude the ES subheadings. You can choose whether or not you want to include to do it in an alternative template, which groups some conditions of use and therefore is a bit more compact. And this is new in 3.2, so not here yet. You can choose a language. What that actually means, we have translated the frame of the exposure scenario, so all the headings and things like that. There is a possibility to import translations for the standard phrases, so you will have to do that yourself. And once that is all available, then you can generate the ESTS, the exposure scenario for communication in the language that you wish. So, and these are just all the EU languages. For now, let's do it in English so we all understand. And there we are. There is my exposure scenario for communication, or a whole package of them. And you see this follows the standard format that has been agreed upon. Okay, I think that basically takes me through all the functionalities. Oh, of course, I need to show you the button that you can also generate the ESCOM XML file. Not worth showing you because it just creates a file which you can save in your computer, but can be very useful because if your IT system is able to import it, then everything is done automatically and there's no need to exchange Word, PDF documents between yourself and your downstream users. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to show you. As said, I won't go into the details on these last two boxes. And in any case, we're running out of time. So I hope it gives you a bit of an overview of how Kazar can help you. If you do have any questions, I think we can take a little bit of time to answer a few now. And otherwise, please approach us in a break. We will be around tomorrow as well.
Yeah, it works. Thanks. I have a question. We are struggling with the modeling of a liquid and solid phase for one substance. Did you manage somehow to put it to the both assessment together, or what is your advice how to handle it? Because so far we have to generate two substances and create two assessments, which is quite uncomfortable, I have to say.
I think it's something which we may best discuss after there are some solutions, but it's a bit too complex for now, I think.